Hello everybody, and a warm welcome to the 2022 Shortlist announcement of the world's leading prize for history writing, the Cundill History Prize. My name is J.R. McNeill, and I have the pleasure of being chair of the jury for the prize this year. I'm thrilled that you can be with us today. To announce the shortlist, I'll be joined by my esteemed colleagues on the jury. Misha Glenny, former BBC Central Europe correspondent, best-selling author and rector of the Institute for Human Sciences in Vienna. Martha Jones, professor of history at the Johns Hopkins University and author of a previous Cundill shortlisted book. Associate professor of British history at the University of Oxford, Yasmin Khan, and Kenda Mutongi, professor of African, world, and gender history at MIT. You can get to know them all further via the Cundill History Prize website at cundillprize.com. First up, let me hand you over to David Wright, Interim Dean of Arts at McGill University. McGill administers the Cundill History Prize.
Thank you, John, and a very warm welcome to everyone from me as well from Montreal. Here at McGill, we are proud to administer the Cundill History Prize and continuously advance its mission to champion the very best in historical scholarship and writing. This year marks the 15th anniversary of the prize, and we are celebrating this milestone across our social media channels with contributions from past winners, jurors, partners, and others close to the prize. It's also the first year since the start of the pandemic that we are returning in person. Our winner ceremony and selected events of the Cundill History Prize Festival will be physical ones here in Montreal, which we are very excited about. However, all our events will continue to have a digital element as well, so you can take part from wherever you are and all remain free to access. The next one to look out for is the finalist announcement, and that's coming your way in October. We are working with our network of media partners, including Literary Hub, CBC Ideas, History Hit, BBC History Extra, and the Literary Review of Canada to bring you the finest content at every stage. Make sure you join our mailing list via the prize website to hear the latest on this year's program. But enough from me, back to you, John.
Thanks, David. Since the prize relaunched in 2017, it has awarded a stellar lineup of historians. Daniel Beer, Maya Jasanoff, Julia Lovell, Camilla Townsend, and last year, Marjoleine Kars for Blood on the River. The professor of history at University of Maryland, Baltimore County, accessed a previously untapped Dutch archive to reveal a little-known story of a 1763 slave rebellion in a Dutch colony in present-day Guyana. We thought we'd check in with her today. Marjoleine, thanks for joining us. What did winning the Cundill History Prize mean to you?
Well, John, winning the Cundill History Prize has been a really heady experience. I still get a huge kick out of seeing that little golden Cundill Prize medallion on the cover of the book. And winning the prize has been an enormous honor that has really lifted my academic profile. But more importantly, it has provided me with opportunities to disseminate my work more widely. Winning the prize has meant that I have been able to talk about the Berbice slave rebellion of 1763 in a variety of venues, ranging from local podcasts to international newspapers and the BBC World News. And next year, the book will even come out in a Chinese translation, and I don't think that would have happened without the Cundill Prize. And so overall, winning the Cundill Prize has allowed me to increase public awareness about this important but overlooked event that tells us so much about the political views of African-descended people in the 18th century Atlantic world. Winning the Cundill Prize is also particularly special to me because it is such a comprehensive prize. Any book in English, including books in translation, are eligible. Authors can be of any nationality. They can write about any era or topic in world history. And that expansive mandate gives the Cundill Prize a particular reach and heft, I think. And good history writing depends on imagination, it depends on interpretation, and the greater the variety of practitioners, the healthier the discipline. And so, to me, the prize is so valuable precisely because the Cundill Prize does not predetermine whose voices and whose stories matter. I'm currently on fellowship leave in the Netherlands, working on a short biography of two African-descended 18th century men whose lives I can track across 3 continents. They are taken as captives from West Africa to Berbice in the 1740s. They emerge as leaders of the 1763 rebellion. But at some point they are caught and they regain their freedom by tracking down their former comrades. As a reward, they are taken to Europe, only to find themselves back in the Americas about a decade later, fighting formerly enslaved people known as Maroons. And I can follow their lives for more than 60 years, which is quite extraordinary, especially because, as you may imagine, few rebel leaders whose attempts at freedom fail live very long lives. And I'm interested in the complex and excruciating choices these men had to make in their attempts at surviving slavery and attaining a modicum of freedom in a racist and authoritarian world that aimed to take choice entirely away from them.
Thank you, Marjoleine. The jury had a busy summer. And after weeks and weeks of intensive and enjoyable reading, we got it down to a long list of 11.
Longlisted for the 2022 Cundill History Prize are In the Forest of No Joy, The Congo Ocean Railroad and the Tragedy of French Colonialism by J.P. Doughton. Cuba by Ada Ferrer. The Perils of Interpreting, The Extraordinary Lives of Two Translators Between Qing China and the British Empire by Henrietta Harrison. Bad Mexicans, Race, Empire, and Revolution in the Borderlands by Kelly Lytle Hernandez. Aftermath, Life in the Fallout of the Third Reich by Harald Janer. The Greek Revolution, 1821 and the Making of Modern Europe by Mark Mazauer. All That She Carried by Tia Miles. The Chinese Question, The Gold Rushes and Global Politics by Mei Nai. Not 1 Inch by M.E. Sarati. Kingdom of Characters, A Tale of Language, Obsession, and Genius in Modern China by Jing Xu. Collapse by Vladislav Zubak.
Together with Misha, Martha, Yasmin, and Kenda, it's now my pleasure to announce the shortlist for the 2022 Cundill History Prize. Here, in random order, are the 8 books we have chosen. First, Cuba, An American History by Ada Ferrer.
Ada Ferrer's Cuba, An American History vividly documents 5 centuries of Cuban history, focusing especially on its reciprocal ties with the United States. She foregrounds the intimate histories of ordinary people and communities, and she ties these intimate histories to larger events such as conquest and colonization, slavery and freedom, and the Cuban Revolution of 1959. Drawing on more than 30 years of research in Cuba, Spain, and the United States, as well as her own extensive travel to Cuba, Farrell examines poignant stories of human connection between the two nations. This history of Cuba will give Americans unexpected insights into the history of their own nation, and in so doing, help them imagine a new relationship with Cuba.
Collapse, The Fall of the Soviet Union by Vladislav Zubok.
Zubok's Collapse is a really timely piece of work. It's coincidental that Mikhail Gorbachev, who is the main character in Collapse, has just died, but it's a really appropriate moment to have a revisionist history, which is what Collapse is, about the Gorbachev years and the end of the Soviet Union and the end of communism. Because what Zubok is able to do, he's not unsympathetic towards Gorbachev. He appreciates that Gorbachev analyzed the crushing failure of the Soviet system once he had become a general secretary of the Communist Party there. But he also is able to identify how Gorbachev, once he'd set these extraordinary events in motion, was then unable to control them and lacked the political understanding to manage this extraordinary historical transformation. So it's not a biography, but it's critically sympathetic to Gorbachev and explains to us the phenomena which eventually ended up in first gangster capitalism and then Vladimir Putin. So if you want to understand what's going on in Russia now, you have to read this book.
In the Forest of No Joy, The Congo-Ocean Railroad and the Tragedy of French Colonialism by J.P. Doughton.
In the Forest of No Joy is a grim and sobering read. It's an unflinching act of historical recovery. It tells the tale of the Congo-Ocean Railway, which was built by the French colonial government in the 1920s to connect the interior of Congo with the Atlantic Ocean. And Doughton, the author of this book, estimates that 15,000 to 23,000 people died in the building of that railway. So it's about the denial of the cost of these deaths at the time and subsequently, and it challenges this unknown story. It's a really recuperative act of history. It aims to tell it from the perspective of those Africans who were involved, wherever possible. And it makes very skillful use of photographic images and of archives from France, from Geneva, and from Congo itself. But there's also an important idea being illustrated here, which is how civilizational and developmental missions, twinned with colonialism, can be put to deadly ends, how the mundane business of the colonial state can end up in this widespread and shocking acts of atrocity. So I think it would be of very widespread interest, and also tells a story that really hasn't been heard before.
All That She Carried, The Journey of Ashley Sack, A Black Family Keepsake by Taya Miles.
Taya Miles' All That She Carried, The Journey of Ashley Sack, A Black Family Keepsake, begins with a question about the origins of an early American cotton sack discovered a century and a half later in a Nashville, Tennessee flea market, and then opens up an epic story of how the love of an enslaved mother was passed to her daughter and then across generations. Intertwining three stories, the journey of a cotton sack from a South Carolina plantation to 21st century museums, of Rose and her daughter Ashley, tragically separated by the inhumanity of enslavement, and of Miles herself, as she labored to retrace the journey of the sack and of the women whose lives and love it embodies. With compassion, elegance, and a frankness about how Miles herself, along with so many of us, are the inheritors of this sort of mother's love, we discover the roots of our deep shared humanity.
The Perils of Interpreting, The Extraordinary Lives of Two Translators Between Qing, China, and the British Empire by Henrietta Harrison.
Henrietta Harrison's The Perils of Interpreting is an impressively documented history of how two translators, a Chinese and a British translator, helped shape Sino-British diplomatic relations in the early 19th century. Harrison compassionately shows the various ways in which the translators sought to promote intercultural understanding and respect by mediating potential conflicts between the Chinese and the British. Most importantly, the private lives of the translators come alive in the book, and we get to know them as complex human beings struggling to make difficult decisions. Deeply researched and elegantly written, The Perils of Interpreting reminds us that we should not overlook seemingly minor issues such as interpreters when studying transnational history.
Not 1 inch. America, Russia, and the Making of a Post-Cold War Stalemate by M.E. Surratt.
When the Berlin Wall collapsed in 1989, the American Secretary of State at the time, James Baker, promised the USSR, promised Gorbachev, that there would be not 1 inch eastward movement of NATO. And of course today NATO has 30 members. And this book by Surratt takes that as its central conundrum. How and why was that promise broken over the 1990s? It's a gripping read, a very pacey read, and it's a pleasure to be a fly on the wall to the private conversations and memos of individuals like Yeltsin, Gorbachev, Bill Clinton, Tony Blair. But the reason I really valued this book was the sheer authority. It's taken hundreds of interviews, private information, declassified files, and at the moment it couldn't be more timely given the war with Ukraine and the current attempts of Finland and Sweden to join NATO. It leaves the tantalising possibility that if things had gone differently in the 1990s, relations with Russia would have been a lot more positive, and even that nuclear disarmament could have taken place.
The Chinese Question, The Gold Rushes and Global Politics by Mei Nai.
The Chinese Question, The Gold Rushes and Global Politics places the migrations and the labor of Chinese workers at the center of capitalism's late 19th century rise in the Anglo worlds of the United States, South Africa, and Australia. She introduces how new regimes of wealth extraction were built in part upon racist notions of difference and strategies of exclusion. Migrant workers confronted the Chinese question by establishing their own economies of mutual aid and political organizing, while also winning the concern of Imperial China's diplomatic higher-ups. Rooted in research across continents and a dazzling range of historiographies, Mei Nai's The Chinese Question takes us from the regrettably familiar story of anti-Chinese law and policy to a new understanding of how today's global economy and the immigration regimes it relies upon echo that past.
Aftermath. Life and the Fallout of the Third Reich, 1945-1955, by Harald Janner.
When I was at university, I read a play called Draußen vor der Tür, which translated into English is The Man Outside. It was about a German prisoner of war returning home after being in Soviet prison for 3 years. And it was a huge sensation in Germany at the time, and is still regarded as a great classic because it encapsulated this weird period between 1945 and 1950 after the war. And now we have this extraordinary book by Harald Janner, who is a German historian and journalist, called Aftermath, which is drawing on hundreds of sources, including Wolfgang Borchert's Draußen vor der Tür, incidentally, to create this extraordinary panoramic understanding of what it was like to live in a country which until very recently had been destroying most of Europe and now itself was completely destroyed. And it really is one of the most evocative pieces of carefully researched history that I have ever read. It's a remarkable piece of work.
Thank you, Misha, Martha, Yasmin, and Kenda, for your insights into these 8 titles. While it was a painful process to eliminate some magnificent books from the competition. It was a pleasure to read so many excellent historians. The 8 books on this shortlist span a wide range of the historian's craft, but all share certain virtues. They demonstrate imagination in research, clarity in writing, and they invite readers to see their subjects in novel ways. The variety of approaches, methods, perspectives, and topics on offer confirms my sense that history nowadays is in very good hands. Well, our jurors' work continues, and I hope you will join us when we announce in mid-October the 3 books we will, after further deliberations, choose as our 2022 finalists. For now, it's goodbye from me, and thank you again for joining us.
I'm very impressed by this year's shortlist, and I wish all of the authors the best of luck, and I feel very honored to share membership in the Cundill Club with you.